Good morning. It's good to be with you this morning. As I was thinking about this message, I was reminded of a few years ago when I was applying for a different job. I was looking to make a career shift a little bit and found this job that I was really interested in. And so I had gotten to about the third stage of interviews, and it was to the point where they were talking about compensation. And I remember when they kind of showed what the compensation package was going to be. And I was like, eyes were big, trying to not reveal too many of my cards, but it was about double the income that I was making at that time. And then on top of that, there was a very generous relocation package of about $20,000 just to move there. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm pretty sure I can do it for less than half of that and pocket the rest. This job was also in Colorado, and so if you know anything about me, I like hiking and kayaking and things like that. So I was just already imagining, oh man, I'm going to be able to go and hike, not just at Mines of Spain, but in real mountains. And kayak, not just on the muddy Mississippi, but in babbling streams and brooks in the Rockies. And I would be able to get a nice, comfortable house, and we would have 2 cars, and they had a very generous dental and 401k match and all these things. And I just remember I was just really looking forward to this. And then I was pretty devastated when I ended up not getting the job, because I knew if I just had this level of income and in this beautiful place, I would be happy. And my family would be happy. And we would just be able to rest and take it easy and work for this organization and just enjoy life. I don't know if you've been in a situation like this before. Maybe you're in one now, where you feel like just a little bit more would just make things easier and nicer. If you could just get, a 10% raise, a 20% raise, maybe shift to a different job or a career that would just give you a little bit more financial freedom. It seems I'm not alone to think that more income will make me more happy. In 2010, Princeton University looked at the survey results of over 1,000 people on various points that they were surveyed on: income, wealth, happiness, self-reflecting on your fulfillment in life. And what they found in these survey results were that income was heavily correlated to happiness and fulfillment, but only up until about $75,000 annually income. After that, adding more wealth did not add more happiness or more satisfaction with your life. It kind of tapered off and plateaued between $60,000 and $90,000 of annual income. And what the researchers revealed, or what they kind of summarized, is that wealth does affect people's emotional well-being, but only to a certain extent. They looked at 2 different indicators. One is what they called life satisfaction. And so that was when you stopped and looked and reflected on your life and thought back about how satisfied you are with your life. And this was heavily correlated with income. As you made more income, people generally felt more satisfied about their life. But they also looked at what they defined as emotional well-being, which they defined as the frequency and intensity of experiences of joy, stress, sadness, anger, and affection that makes one's life either pleasant or unpleasant. And so most of the time when they would survey this, they would ask about what emotions did you experience yesterday? What does your day-to-day look like? And this is what they found, that with more wealth, up until that point, people's day-to-day experience improved as they made more income. But when they reflected on their life overall, it really plateaued after a certain point. And so they concluded, low income intensifies the emotional pain associated with such misfortunes as divorce, ill health, being alone. We conclude that high income buys life satisfaction, but not happiness, and that low income is associated both with low life evaluation and low emotional well-being. So to put that in layman's terms, basically, being poor makes life harder. It exacerbates the difficulties of life. And I think most of us understand this intuitively, and maybe we've experienced this at one point or another. When you get a flat tire and you only have $10 in your bank account, the emotional toll that takes on you is very different than when you get a flat tire and you have $10,000 in your savings account. Because you have the means to just quickly solve that problem and move on. But when you're poor, these things just build up on one another, and it just makes life even harder. And this observation corresponds with the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. Proverbs 10:15 says, "A rich man's wealth is his strong city. The poverty of the poor is their ruin." We see this just as general life application, that if you're poor, it's difficult. And if you have more income and wealth, it makes life easier. Not perfect and not perfectly happy, but it does make life easier. Maybe we've experienced this, but when you have the funds to do preventative maintenance on your cars, on your houses, and even on your bodies, they last longer. When you can change the oil and the tires and the brakes, your car lasts longer. When you can eat healthy and exercise and actually see a physician when you have a problem, it makes things go easier. But when you don't have those basic things, they stack up on one another, and it makes things difficult. When you can't afford to fix problems, they domino into dire circumstances. Is this what Jesus is talking about? Not having a savings account or an emergency fund? Is Jesus not aware of the most recent data and findings of researchers? Doesn't Jesus want me to be happy? And how much money is treasure, by the way? Let's also not forget who Jesus is talking to in the Sermon on the Mount. We talked about this way back in chapter 4. But Matthew describes the type of people who's in front of Jesus as he's talking to his disciples. It's the poor, the lame, the beggars, those who are paralyzed, who are crippled, the outcasts of society. So why is Jesus talking to them about building wealth? They couldn't build wealth if they tried. These are the people who have already tried and did not do so successfully. So what is going on here? Well, we're going to walk through this passage piece by piece and look at what it would have meant to them and then how that relates to us. So the first part, Jesus says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal." He says, do not accumulate treasures for yourself on this earth. Why? Why should we not accumulate treasures? And what is treasure? What does treasure mean? How much money are we talking about here? New Testament scholar Scott McKnight says, treasure here surely involves possessions, but is not the same as possessions. Instead, it refers to the accumulation of things as a focus of joy. As we walk through, I think we're going to see when Jesus is talking about treasure, he's talking about things that we accumulate for ourselves and our own enjoyment. And Jesus says, don't lay up for yourselves treasures here on earth. Why? Because it's not secure. Look at the reasons that he gives. He says, don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. Why? Because it's where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. Now, for most of us, this doesn't really affect us day to day when we think about our treasure or wealth or things like that. Sure, maybe if you have a fancy car, it will rust away over time. I remember there was a guy in our small town who had 3 classic cars that were sitting out, rusting away. He had a 69 Dodge Charger RT and a 67 Chevy Chevelle and a Super Bee. Cars worth $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 if in mint condition, and they would just sit out for years and years and rust. And I remember sitting on the bus, riding, and we'd go past this guy's house and thinking, oh, one day maybe I'll buy one of those cars and fix it up, and I'll be able to drive around in a 69 Charger RT. Those cars are still there. When I go and visit my family, they're still there. And guess what? Rust does destroy. Moth and rust destroy. Now, is this what Jesus had in mind? Was the 69 Dodge Charger? Probably not, but the realities are the same back then as they are now. When you try and save things, it's not going to last. The example he uses is where moth or vermin destroy, where animals and critters would destroy. A lot of people at this time had fancy clothes, or maybe not in his audience, but some of the wealthy would have had fine garments and things like that they would try and preserve and maybe wear, but maybe just keep as a form of enjoyment or just keeping that wealth. And those clothes, if they weren't taken care of and checked on properly, moths could get in and eat away at them. Or other things could come in and deteriorate. And we see this with money as well. Now, most of these people didn't use a banking system the way we do today. Maybe they had some coins, as we see through different places in the Bible, where people lose coins and then they find them, or where they try and find different coins. But those coins could rust and could deteriorate over time. We see this, that people would hide things in their homes. Back in Joshua, we looked at a story of a man named Achan, who hid treasures, both garments and money, underneath his tent. So people would take things and they would hide it in their homes because there wasn't a national banking system that was federally insured. So Jesus is saying, if you try and save these things for yourself in your homes, it's not safe. It's not safe because moth can destroy, rust can destroy, and where thieves can break in and steal. So is Jesus trying to get them to just place their money in a more secure location? Is that what Jesus is after, the Dave Ramsey financial wealth of his day? He's just like, no, put your money in a better place. And how does this relate to us? Well, at least this part, let me just contextualize this to maybe for some of us and our financial system so that way we understand a little bit more. Do not accumulate lots of wealth for yourselves, where bank fees and inflation can destroy, where lawsuits and medical debt can wipe it out in one fell swoop. Did you know that the leading cause of bankruptcy today is medical debt? It's not bad investments, it's not even drug addictions or things like that. It's medical debt. You could have a medical emergency, and whether you have no insurance or whether your insurance has a cap, in one fell swoop, it could wipe out your savings. And if this gives you anxiety to think about this, come back next week. We're going to be talking about anxiety and worry in the next passage. But Jesus is saying that this wealth is not secure. Both then and today, wealth is not secure. So what does Jesus say we should do? He says, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Treasures in heaven. Now, if you remember from the past previous weeks, Jesus is not anti-reward. He's about getting the reward in the right way and in the right place. Jesus is not saying you shouldn't want any reward, you shouldn't seek any reward, but he's saying you need to find it in the correct way. So what is treasure in heaven? Is Jesus talking about just transferring your wealth here on earth to a secure bank account in the cloud? No, not Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, different cloud here. But is he talking about just transferring our wealth to somewhere else so we can enjoy our wealth in heaven? I remember the first time I heard about this treasure in heaven idea. I think I was 8 or 9 years old, and we were at church, and it had snowed about 4 inches. And a couple of us kids, our parents asked us to go outside and clear off the cars from the snow before everyone got out. So we went out and we started clearing off the snow from the cars. And I remember a friend saying, he started clearing off the car next to it. And I was like, well, why are you doing that? And he said, oh, I'm going to get treasure in heaven. And I just thought, really? That's how this works? So we just ran around the whole parking lot, clearing off every car we could find, just thinking about the jewels and the crowns that we were going to get in heaven for clearing off the cars. Is that what Jesus is talking about? That you should take your wealth here and put it in jewels, but in the good place? I don't think that this is what Jesus is talking about. I think this is still missing the mark. He says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So there's something going on here with our heart. It's not just about good financial advice, about putting our money somewhere else. As we've seen through the whole Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is as interested, if not more interested, in our heart than he is in our outward actions. Now, don't be mistaken, the two are tied together. They can't be separated. But you can try and put your outward actions in one way, and your heart is still darkened and corrupt, and not what Jesus is desiring. But we're going to come back to this in a little bit. Let's continue on with what Jesus says in verses 22 through 23. He says, the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? We'll see after this, Jesus comes back to the topic of wealth, and so this conversation about the eye seems out of place here. It seems like Jesus has just mashed together some sort of weird teaching about the eye in between 2 things of financial advice or 2 things about money. Is this just some sort of mistaken sandwich that Matthew has put together as he's trying to remember what Jesus has taught? Or is there something else going on here? The eye was seen at this time as the portal to the soul. There was 2 different theories about how the eye would work. And Jesus, by saying the eye is the lamp of the body, is shining light on one of those. Now, commentators have argued back and forth of which idea of the eye was probably the most prominent at the time of Jesus, but there was one called extramission, which is where they thought your eye sent out rays, and that is how you would see things. The eye would project out, and you would see different things, almost like a scanning tool or something like that we think of. And then there was the idea of intermission, which is where light comes into the eye, and that's how you see, which now we recognize is the way that our eyes function with the modern scientific evidence that we see that light comes into our eyes. But at the time of Jesus, there's also this idea that your eye is a portal to the soul, and it shines out what is in your heart. And so Jesus says that if what is in your heart is darkness, that's going to shine out through your eyes. And if what's in your life is light, that's going to shine out through your eyes. Now, most of us don't have glowing eyes where we can see, oh, that person's got the light. Oh, that person's got the darkness. We don't see it this way. This is a metaphor. But what most understand is that Jesus is talking about how you view others. Do you view them with generosity? Or do you view them with stinginess? And this, how you view others, reveals about what's going actually on inside your soul. It's not just how you evaluate them, it's a reflection of who you are and what's inside your heart. Recognition that a bad eye fills you with darkness, like blindness, also carried a connotation of sinfulness and badness. The eye was the window to the soul. And so Jesus is saying that your eye reveals a lot about how you view people. It's very interesting if you turn over to Matthew 20, verse 15. Jesus is teaching a parable about laborers in the vineyard. And this is the parable where men come and work for a little while, and they're going to get a certain amount of money, and then the vineyard owner comes and asks more people to start working at noon, and then some people to start working at 3 or 4. And so then at 5 o'clock when they stop and they start handing out the money, the people who have been working all day are upset because they only get the same amount of money as the guys who started at 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock and only worked an hour or two. And then what the vineyard owner says in verse 15 is, am I not allowed to do what I choose, what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? Look and see if you have a footnote there. It's also translated, or do you begrudge? It says, or is your eye bad because I'm good? Is your eye bad because I'm good? This idea of generosity and stinginess is one of the ways that these words in Matthew 6 are translated. And so we see here that there's a link here between how we view others and how we're generous and what is going on in our soul. So what does that have to do with storing up treasures in heaven? Well, I think there's a few things going on that are not mutually exclusive. First is that it does reveal what's in our hearts. But then there's this idea of intromission, where things coming in through your eyes affects your body. And we see this in the passage too, where Jesus says, if your eye is bad or unhealthy, or if your eye is healthy or good or clear, depending on, this is a really slippery word to translate. Your translations have a few different things going on here. But if your eye is bad, it's going to fill your body with darkness and badness. And I think this teaching is as relevant today as it's ever been. What we watch, what we dwell on, the things we put in our soul through our eyes affects us way more than we want to realize. The movies we watch, marketing we're exposed to, ads, social media, they have an effect on us. They cause us to want things, to crave things. When I started taking some marketing courses, I started seeing a trend that has happened a little bit recently in chief marketing officers of big corporations. Big corporations are starting to hire chief marketing officers not with a background in traditional marketing or business, but with a background in psychology. And that's because marketing ethics is really blurry. What for one person looks like manipulation and taking advantage of people is to another just a good strategy. And who better to get you to understand to click on an ad than a psychologist, than someone who has a formal training in understanding what shapes behaviors and actions. Companies don't spend millions of dollars on ads because they don't work. They spend millions of dollars on ads because they do work. And they work so well that it causes us to take action. Good marketing should influence your emotions, desires, and cause you to take action. Whether that's filling something out, whether it's purchasing a product, whether it's voting for someone, good marketing should cause you to want to take action. How have I noticed this in my life? Well, as I am on my phone and I see advertisements for new motorcycles or maybe different espresso machines, and I look at that and then I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And the more I look at that, even if I don't click on the ad, if I just hover over it and stop and just scroll slower, that's considered a clickable action. And so then the algorithm starts serving you more ads that are similar content to that. And then the more you see those ads, the more your flesh and your heart desires those things. And then you want to see those ads even more. And it's this downward, dark spiral of desire and want and greed and unsatisfied lives. It's also interesting if I take the time to clean up my algorithm, what I call it, as I go onto Facebook or Google or YouTube and say, show less of this, and do that a few times, the algorithm recalibrates, and I see less of those things. But what's really interesting is when I reflect, that also does the same thing to my heart. When I see less of those ads and I spend less time dwelling on those things, in a few days, I'm like, oh yeah, I don't need a new motorcycle. I don't know why I was thinking about spending $20,000 and taking out a loan and like, what was I thinking? You kind of like wake up a little bit because your heart and your affections can be calibrated. It's like your taste buds. People come to the US and they're like, everything's so sweet. And we go to other countries and we're like, everything's so like not sweet. It's bitter. Our tastes can be calibrated, and so can the affections of our hearts. I think this is what Jesus is trying to get at here with our eyes. I think Jesus is teaching here about our eyes being connected to our treasure, and the darkness of our souls is more relevant now than ever. And if we're not careful with what we put into our lives through our eyes, we'll be mastered by it. Jesus continues, no one can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. This seems to be the climactic point of Jesus' teaching. He's kind of given some examples, some analogies that they would understand. He's talking about the eye, but then he gets to this point and says, you can't serve two masters. You can either choose to serve God or you can choose to serve money. And he lays it down with two paths in front of you. But why? Why is it that we can't serve God and money? Many times I sure seem to believe that I can. I can take that job over there that, makes a ton of money in Colorado and work for that Christian organization, right? Sometimes they pull you in different directions. And when they pull you in different directions, it will reveal which one you're actually serving. For much of our lives, we think that we can serve money and God together. But when something comes up in your life that you have to choose, it will reveal which one you're serving. And many of us, if we're actually trusting in money and the security that it brings us, will only serve God until it conflicts with that money, until it conflicts with our trust structures, until we see that, actually, if I obey what God says, I'm actually going to be really hurting financially. This is going to impact my 401k or my future or my savings account. And how you wrestle with that is going to reveal a little bit about yourself, of what are you truly serving. Now, if you are truly trusting and serving God, you can still use money, but you won't serve it. You will hold it lightly in your hands and say, Lord, like, you've given me this, I want to use it for you, and right now, what's in front of me, this is how I think I can best do that. But if he takes that away, you're okay. You're okay with losing the vacation home or the hobby or downsizing to a smaller house or whatever it looks like for you. You're okay because you're holding it with an open hand. This also links back to the first part that we kind of skipped over a little bit. It says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Jesus is tying these things together, that your heart is connected with how you use your money. And this reveals a lot about our hearts. As Jesus' other teaching on anger, on lust, on all these other things, outward, external character, or external like actions don't necessarily reveal a heart that is transformed. But a heart that is transformed will always overflow with actions that speak to that. So we started out by asking, how much money justifies treasure? How much money can I have in order for Jesus to call it treasure? But it seems that the question that Jesus wants us to ask is, what am I treasuring? What in my life am I treasuring? What am I spending most of my time on? What am I spending my disposable income on? What am I spending my eyes and my thought life dwelling on, reading about, cherishing? Is it wealth? Is it the things that wealth can buy? Is it security? Are they temporal things, or is it Christ and his kingdom? Now, none of us can do this perfectly. We can't just spend all day, every day, reading our Bible and not going to work or not doing things. So I don't want to set up this like false dichotomy here. But a lot of us do have a lot of time and money, and how we invest that reveals a lot about our hearts. So how is this seen in your life? Well, a transformed heart should manifest itself in financial giving. Financial giving is not the limit of what Jesus is talking about here, but it's not less than that. Jesus is not talking about financial giving, about being generous. I love this quote, and I've come back to it a couple different times, by author Dallas Willard, talking about belief. It says, "We don't believe something by merely saying we believe it, or even believing that we believe it. We believe something when we act as if it were true." Many of us, myself included, may say we don't trust in money, and we may even believe that we don't trust in money. But my actions and my response when big financial hits are taken reveals what I actually believe. My actions of, if I act as if it were true that Jesus and his kingdom is first, and all these things will be added to you later, or in different ways, if I believe that, my actions will show that. I have a natural bent to be stingy. When I go and meet someone for coffee, my natural bent is to let them go first, to see if they're going to buy their own drink, or if they're going to be presumptuous and assume that I'm going to buy it for them. I am naturally that stingy that it's hard to buy a $5 cup of coffee if you're at Starbucks, maybe $2 if you're at Dunkin'. I am naturally stingy. And it's been revealed to me as I've had friendships with other people who are more naturally or more gifted in being generous. And what they bring to the potluck, what they bring to the Friendsgiving, and what I bring and what I want to contribute. So how can we take steps in the right direction? How can we condition our longings to be more towards God and less towards the things of this world? How can we clean up the algorithm of our life, so to speak? I think there's a couple different ways. The first is subtractive. And this is removing things in your life that are causing you to not look at God and His kingdom. Whether it's cleaning up your algorithm on social media or Google to show you less ads for that jacket or that dress or those shoes or that espresso machine, or whether it's maybe getting off social media altogether. I'm not going to be presumptuous and tell you what you should do. We've done both things in our family. But take an evaluation of what are the inputs, the podcasts, the radio things that you listen to. Are they pointing you more towards Christ and His kingdom? Or are they pointing you more towards the things of this world? So that's subtraction, taking things out. And then there's also additive practices. So that would be actively doing things, putting things into your life. So I would say giving generously, making this a habit is one way that you can start cultivating these things. Giving generously both to church and to the poor and to organizations that assist the poor, whether it's the Clarity Clinic, the Dream Center, the Mission, whether it's a larger organization like Compassion International or some of these other things. Giving is a way that we can start cultivating our heart. It's very painful at first, but it is very good for us to show God, like, listen, I'm going to hold this with an open hand. Most people look at starting or attempting to give a tithe, which is 10% of your income. Some have done that and are pushing towards generosity. There's things called graduated tithes, where you tithe and then whatever is left over at the end of the month, you tithe on that again. Or there's adding extra things to your budget line just to be generous to other people. Having an actual budget item in your family budget that says generosity, and you go and help and buy things for people or give a gift or buy that book or whatever it is on top of your regular tithing. But the other thing that we can do to place our trust in God is to start putting little reminders in our life, reminders of God's goodness. Whether it's writing little sticky notes and placing them on your mirror or on your car visor, things remembering how good God is and all the good gifts that He's already given us and all the things that we take for granted. These are things that will start cultivating in our lives joy and thankfulness. And that will then spill out in generosity to others because we're just so joyful and just so thankful for what we have. We don't need this extra stuff. We'll just give it to others. The goal of these small practices is to transform our hope from the fleeting securities of riches to the everlasting hope found in God through Jesus Christ. And this will bring joy. One last little piece of interesting thing I found was in that 2010 Princeton survey, there was a very strong correlation with life, well-being, and happiness tied to wealth. But there were other indicators on there that people surveyed on. It wasn't just about that. And there were a few other things that correlated almost as high as income. But there was one that correlated even higher to people's life satisfaction and well-being than their income. And that was those who self-identified as religious. Those who have a concept of something greater than themselves, that they're not tied into just this material world, those people had an even greater proportionate of joy and satisfaction with their life than those who had large incomes. When we make Jesus and his kingdom the treasures of our hearts, we'll find that this joy can never be taken away. And this is the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, the good news that was preached to the poor, the Sermon on the Mount, the sick and the lowly, that the hopelessness of this world and the riches is being swallowed up by the hope of our King and his kingdom coming to this earth. Let that be the foundation of your joy and peace. Let's pray. Father, we have a lot of work to do as Christians in the West and in America, where we are bombarded with ads and neighbors and things that make our hearts want things, that make our hearts want to trust in things that are not you. So, Father, I pray as we reflect on this passage this morning that you would give us hearts that see that we can't serve both you and money. That in order to love one, we have to hate the other. And while it's not bad to want the good things that you bring in our life, help us not to place our trust in them. Father, help us to use our income or our careers in a way that would further your kingdom. Father, I pray that you would convict us this morning. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.